All right, welcome to our explainer. Today we're going to tackle two words you hear thrown around constantly, and usually not in a good way: interest groups and lobbyists. But what do they actually do, and how did they get to be so powerful? Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's just start with what our source material calls the alphabet soup of American politics. I mean, you look at this and it's a lot. You might recognize a few, right? Maybe the AARP or the AFL-CIO, but you have to realize this is just a tiny, tiny fraction of the thousands of organizations out there, all pushing for their own specific thing.
But here's the thing. Behind all that crazy complexity are two really simple concepts: interest groups and the lobbyists that they hire. And if you want to understand how decisions really get made in Washington, you've got to understand these two.
Okay, so let's break it down. First things first, what is an interest group anyway?
So what are we talking about here? Well, the source defines them really broadly. It can be a massive industry, like big pharma, or it could be a whole profession, like teachers. Or it might be a group that's laser-focused on one single issue, like protecting the environment or gun rights. The common thread is that they all want to influence public policy.
So how do they do that? Well, according to our source material, it's kind of like a two-step playbook. First, you donate money to political campaigns to help get people into office who are on your side. And second, you hire professional lobbyists to go meet with those lawmakers and get right in their ear to help shape the laws as they're being written.
All right, so we know what they are, but who are they? And how in the world do we end up with so many of them? And when you look at this timeline from our source, a really fascinating pattern just jumps out at you. The number of these groups pretty much exploded in direct response to the government itself getting bigger. Every time the government expanded its power, whether it was new regulations back in the Progressive Era or the New Deal or the huge social programs of the 60s, a whole new wave of groups popped up to try and influence how all that new power and money got used.
And what you end up with is this constant tug of war between competing interests. As you can see here, for just about every powerful group out there, there's another one organized to push back from the opposite direction. So you have big industry groups on one side, and you've got labor unions like the AFL-CIO on the other. This is exactly that multiplicity of voices that the founders actually thought would be a good thing.
Okay, but if you've got thousands of different groups all yelling for attention, how do you actually get heard over all that noise? Well, the answer, for the most part, comes down to one word: money. And one of the main tools they use is something called a political action committee, or a PAC. Now, these things really exploded after the Watergate scandal. See, new rules made it harder for individuals to donate huge amounts directly. So PACs became the new workaround, a way for interest groups to bundle a ton of smaller donations into one big, much more powerful contribution.
To give you an idea of just how much money we're talking about, let's rewind a bit. This number right here, $2.1 billion, that's how much was spent on all federal campaigns way back in 1996. And trust me, that number has just skyrocketed since then.
And if you drill down into that number, it's just staggering. In that very same election, the source reports that the average cost just to win one single Senate seat was $4.7 million. I mean, think about that. When it costs that much just to get the job, you're going to need a lot of help paying for it.
So where is all this money coming from? Well, it's not from bake sales. A study from back then, cited in our source, found something pretty wild. Less than 0.1% of Americans, a tiny, tiny group of people, accounted for a full 40% of all the money raised for Congress. And the legal reason all of this is possible, it really comes down to this one very controversial Supreme Court case from 1976, Buckley versus Valeo. The court basically said that spending money on campaigns is a form of free speech and it's protected by the First Amendment. Because of that one ruling, it's been incredibly hard to pass any laws that really limit campaign spend.
So all of this, it leads to the huge debate at the heart of our source material. Is this whole system a corruption of the democratic process, or is it actually a vital part of it?
All right, let's start with the case against them. Why do so many people see this system as a huge threat to democracy?
Well, as the source lays out, the critics' main argument is that big money just drowns out everybody else. They argue it makes people totally cynical about politics because it feels like the whole one person, one vote idea is kind of a joke. The big fear here is that money doesn't just buy you a coffee, it buys you special access and influence. And that means policies get tilted to favor the wealthy and powerful.
Okay, but that's just one side of the argument. Our source is very clear that there's another perspective here. The case for these groups being not just a good thing, but maybe even a necessary one.
From this point of view, these groups are actually essential. I mean, think about it. Issues today are incredibly complicated. Lobbyists can bring some serious expertise to lawmakers who might not know the ins and outs of, say, the tech industry or pharmaceuticals. They also act as one clear voice for an entire sector, and sometimes they even help set standards themselves, like the movie rating system we all know.
And this idea, it's not new. It actually goes all the way back to the founders. You've got James Madison, in the super famous Federalist paper number 10, arguing that having all these different groups and factions fighting it out, well, that wasn't a problem, it was the solution. He thought it was the best defense against any one group getting too powerful and taking over.
Which brings us right back to the central question, doesn't it? Does James Madison's vision of competing interests still work in a world of multi-billion-dollar campaigns? Or, to put it another way, when money talks that loudly, is the chorus of democracy truly equal?